And welcome to the Midday Show. I'm Jeff Everett. He is Mark Messina. Loaded show today. There wasn't a lot of news, but I think the topics we found are good topics, so I'm excited for that.
We'll make them good.
We'll make them good topics. Before we get to that, you are unbearable today. I'm not going to tell you. Can decide if you want to let the people know why or not, but at the risk, I already know how this is going to go. I'm afraid to ask you.
First
Mark,
of all,
how are you feeling today?
Right now, I'm still cold.
Okay.
Because I was outside. No, I'm excited. And it is no reason why you would ever guess.
Okay.
I just saw online that Wasp is going on tour for their 40th anniversary year, whatever.
Okay. I always give you time limits and you completely ignore them. In 10 seconds, who is Wasp?
An 80s hair metal band that was just kind of like...
Okay. And is it Wasp one word, or is it like W period A period S period P period? Okay.
Because supposedly it was an anagram for we are sexually perverted or something like that. Whether that was a gimmick. They didn't suck. They weren't great. But just like when you're an old guy like me, who I think it was Electric Circus.
Okay.
They had a song called Blind in Texas.
Okay.
I don't know. It took me back. I was like, it's one of these things. I can't believe they're still alive. And not because they're that much older, because most of these guys are probably in their 60s, because they were young when they're in their 20s.
Okay.
But I don't think they live the cleanest, most wholesome of lifestyles.
I would imagine they do not.
But Keith Richards is still with us, so you never know. But yes, Wasp on tour. Yeah. Let's go.
I've always wondered, you see like Betty White almost making it to 100, or what do you think is the oldest rock star? Like, is there a rock star that's made it to like 85, 90?
That's a good question. I think
because the lifestyle just is not conducive to it.
The fact that Keith Richards and Ozzy Osbourne are still going is a miracle of science.
Yes, it really is. I always feel bad for the singers in those bands too, because I feel like everything else can kind of ride it out, but the voice is going to be the first thing to go. It is
tough. You wonder that there's because I know like Sammy Hagar's in his mid-70s and can still sing.
Okay.
But there are lots of guys who can't. And
no, it's the first thing to go.
You could if you can play a guitar, you could probably play guitar a lot longer than a guy can sing. But Steven Tyler seems, I don't know. Anyway, Wasp on tour. See it. Now, would I see Wasp if they can? No. But it sounds fun.
Fun. We have different definitions of fun. We're going to talk about something that's kind of flowing around Europe and other parts of the world, the right to disconnect law. You and I have an interesting discussion to have around that. I want to talk about the Omicron variant and kind of what's happening in America. I think there's two sides to the tale because a lot of the research is starting to come out now from Asia and from South Africa and what they're seeing from like the effects of the new variant. So yes, cases are up, but there's also this other side of it where the actual health concerns itself are down. So I just kind of wanted to balance those two things out. I thought it'd be an interesting conversation as well. And then you brought up, you just don't like James Franklin is what I'm learning more and more.
No, I'm not, but I think it's a topic of discussion.
No, I think it's worth talking about too. So let's get the gruesome stuff out of the way first. The US, most of us know that there's a surge right now. However, it's being reported on Monday. Most of the news outlets came out and said that it was a record day globally. So the United States broke the one-day reported record for COVID cases since this started 2 years ago. We're coming up on 2 years. But go ahead.
No, I was going to let you do it. That was all I was contributing.
That was good. But part of the catch there is there was a holiday surplus. John Hopkins came out and said that as they were adding up the numbers, they were basically doubling back and collecting multiple days because everybody deserves some time off. And even the people that are counting the COVID cases at John Hopkins took some time off over the holidays, over the New Year's week.
It's like when you run a retail business and you make that Monday morning bank deposit.
Yes.
It's for Sunday, and Saturday, and sometimes even Friday.
Yes. So Monday's case count, it's not that it's incorrect, but it's just a little exaggerated. It's a little inflated because it's multiple days after the holiday and kind of Hopkins and these other research institutions getting their stuff together after the holidays.
Yes.
The other part of this too that's coming out, there were 6 different research groups, and this I actually didn't get to talk to you about before we started today. There were 6 different research groups that came out that have finished up their original studies on the Omicron variant. And what they've discovered is the big thing in what was being pushed through the first couple of variants is this was a variant that attacked your lungs, right? So it got in, destroyed your lungs, and that's what made it difficult to breathe. What they're finding with the Omicron variant is that not only is it less likely to damage your lungs, most of the cases do not. It actually doesn't reach your lungs at all. It actually ends up in your throat. And so what's happening with a lot of the cases now, you're hearing people say like it's hard to swallow, they're having sore throats, almost more like a strep, if anyone's ever had strep throat before. So who
hasn't had strep?
Who hasn't had strep? So part of what's happening, according to the research, Hopkins and 5 other research groups, they are saying that that is part of the reason why this variant is so much more transmissible, but also why hospitalizations and deaths have not spiked through the roof.
That makes sense.
Yes. So part of it is just while it's in your lungs, it's more harmful to you, but less harmful to spread it to others. It's more difficult for it to make its way up through the lungs outside of your passages. However, this one is the opposite. Because it doesn't get all the way down into your lungs, you're less likely to need to go to the hospital. You're less likely to have like these killer symptoms. However, it's right there in your
You're going to give it to everybody.
And you are going to give it to anybody and everybody that you walk past and you're talking to.
We had this conversation at basketball the other day, and not that this has anything to do with anything. We were talking about strep throat, and I've had it. Like, I assume you've had it.
I've had strep once or twice, yeah.
Oh, that's it?
I've been very fortunate, yes.
So I told him how much I enjoy, because when they take that long Q-tip and they have to scratch the back of your throat to get the sample, like that's my favorite part, because you can't reach the back of your throat. And the kids were like, oh, it makes you gag. I was like, well, yes, but it's back there where it hurts and you can't reach it. And they can. And they're just like, I've told the guy to do it again on the other side.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
What is wrong with you?
Oh my God. You can't, it's the only way you can get any relief.
Oh, brutal. So just to clarify, because again, we've beaten some of this like a dead horse, but I think it's worth talking about. The cases are correct. John Hopkins reported just over 1 million cases on Monday for over the holiday weekend, and 3.3 million COVID cases from Christmas to New Year's Day. And it is a global record, and it's all true. But Hopkins is also reporting at the same time that what we're finding with this variant is that like it's just not going to have the same negative effect on hospitals. It doesn't mean hospitals aren't full.
Right.
It doesn't mean that those things aren't true, but it is having a less effect on individual bodies and how sick they're getting. And they're saying, especially if you've had the shot, especially if you have been boosted, this is essentially a sore throat for most Americans who are getting it.
Well, there you go.
So,
now, that doesn't mean I want to get it, though.
No, absolutely not. I'm still, like I said, I have all 3 of my shots. I'm still avoiding it, still trying to be as safe as I can. But yeah, it's funny to me, depending on which news site you went to and who you were reading everything else, some people, it's as if nothing's happening. Other ones were setting global records. And so I appreciated Hopkins and some of these others saying like, well, both sides can be true at the same time.
I wonder, now that I'm just thinking out loud, I wonder if because of the differences of this, will it affect kids more? Because it seemed like the other one, kids either didn't get it or they were asymptomatic or whatever.
Sure.
Does this one like?
No, it's
because kids, question. You find out, seem to get colds and sore throats and stuff more than adults.
Right.
Especially when they're young. So I wonder how that plays out.
Yeah. And it also, there was one other piece to it that they were discussing, and they're trying to research how before the earlier variants, because it attacked your lungs, it meant if you had certain symptoms or there were certain things within your own physiology that you were more susceptible than this. So now what they're trying to figure out is that because it doesn't necessarily go after your lungs, it's more of a throat virus. They're trying to see what are the things that are more susceptible.
This may be the one that all men are truly created equal because everyone has a throat, and there you go.
Possibly. So they're trying to figure out who is now more susceptible and everything else. But I appreciated Hopkins and some of the other research ones being able to come out and being like, hey, just so you know, we tallied up more than one day's.
The numbers are right, but
yes.
you need to understand how the numbers work.
Yes. And then at the same time, them kind of releasing what they know about Omicron now that we're into it. And they said to a lot of these research organizations and colleges and all these places that are looking into this, to their credit, when Omicron first came out of South Africa, they were trying to tell people, like, this is going to take time to know how bad this is, what it is, what's really happening here. Because there were some people just kind of like sound the alarms, like,
well, I remember when they said this one will spread way quicker than the other one.
Yes.
And they were right. And when you combine what we were going through with, oh my God, this one spreads quicker. And now 6 months later, like, well, it spreads quicker, but you don't get nearly as sick.
Yeah.
At least most people don't.
So I appreciate Hopkins and different places like that being willing to kind of be like, hold on a second, here's what it is, what's going on. So I thought that was worthwhile talking about really quickly. The other one that caught my eye today, more and more countries have introduced a right to disconnect law for employees. I don't know if we will ever see this in our country, but I think it was worth talking about. The newest country to do it is Belgium. What they are doing, and they're just following the groove of other European countries, they are basically allowing government employees that when they are off the clock, they are not held responsible to reply or respond to any messages from their bosses or other government officials. They set up a system where, unless it's like a code red, unless it's an absolute,
Did you order the code red?
I did not order the code red.
You did not order the code red?
I did not.
So you, Lieutenant Weinberg?
So what they're going to do is they're implementing this system.
You have seen that movie. Please tell me.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
Okay. I'm just
so what they're going to do is they have this system in place. And once you're off the clock at 5 o'clock and your weekend started, you are no longer responsible to reply to your boss. And I just can't ever imagine that happening in the United States.
I strenuously object. Now I'm just going to say lines
the
for
whole
a few
time.
good men.
Yeah, that's going to make for good radio.
That's the difference between paper law and trial law.
Yes.
I think this makes perfectly good sense because, again, it's not a cap. It's a government position.
Correct.
It's only for government. So it's not a capitalistic business. It's not a commerce, whatever. It's, you work in the courthouse or you work for whomever. I wonder if this counts for school teachers. You don't have to respond to your principal. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's for those people who aren't in a business that's generating revenue. So here, like when you're off the clock, you don't have to respond.
So here's this would be the two things that first came to my head, because you said it, it's a government employee. However, government employees are paid by taxes.
Correct.
You and I pay for it. Do you see where I'm going with this?
But they're paid a salary.
Correct.
To work 40 hours a week.
Correct. That we pay for.
Correct.
So you're going to institute something that you're not going to be able to apply to the capitalistic side of your country.
Correct.
Okay. And so I'm going to be working, and then I'm giving a certain percentage of my money to the government to pay these employees that now have a right to disconnect law that I myself do not have the benefit of benefiting.
Sure you do.
Why?
You have the right to disconnect.
Not if my employer decides I don't.
No, yes, you do. Then you just go get another job.
Okay, correct. And I'd have to get a government job. But do you see where I'm going?
You wouldn't have to get a government job.
You don't think there's any double side to that at all? Not even a little bit. And listen, I think I'm pro the right to disconnect law. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. Like, I actually think it's a good thing. But if I'm just a citizen of the country and I'm paying taxes, and then these people that are government employees that I'm paying for get a right to disconnect law that I myself will not see or benefit from, you don't see how that could be twisted?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. They get healthcare, they get retirement that you may not see.
Sure.
Depending on
so what you're
employer.
saying is that I myself have made the choice to not work under the government.
Correct.
I myself have decided to work within the free market.
The real question that I have in this is what instituted it, and were there people in certain sections of the Belgium government who were their boss expected them to work 80 hours a week, and they're like, I'm on a salary, yet I'm being called in on Saturdays, and so what perpetuate. It's not the right word. Doesn't start with.
I don't know, but get off of it. Just get off.
What word initiated this? But that's not. There's a word that starts with a P that I'm.
Okay.
Precipitated.
Okay.
Is that what I'm looking for?
Yeah, sure.
I think
just want
it
to hear
is.
your thought.
Why? Why did they put the law in? That's what I'm wondering.
Okay.
There must have been an issue, or they wouldn't have, and there wouldn't be this big grand announcement. So
I think you're right. I think you're right that if you've chosen to work in the free market, you can't really look at it from that perspective of like, well, I'm paying for these government employees and yet they're getting this law that I don't get. The other part of it that I found interesting was I would ask who is paying for their phone or their device in which they're receiving the messages. And so what I would say is that if it's a government issued phone or laptop, I don't know if the right to disconnect law necessarily needs to be applied to it because they're paying for you. That is part of the gig, is having this phone and being available and being at.
Well, that's like saying if you have a company car that you have to be at, like the boss texts you at 2 a.m. and like, come pick me up.
But I'm just saying, like I've always said this before. I've heard school teachers before say, they don't respond to emails over the weekend because they have to pay for their own phone and for their own laptop. And I couldn't agree with that more in a way. Like, I actually think that's very fair.
No, I get it.
So, however, if the school is issuing you the phone or the laptop or the device or whatever, I'm not saying you should be available all the time. However, I think it changes the argument. I think it's very easy to say, I have the right to disconnect because like this is my device and it's my time and it's. However, if you're being issued these things, I think it's different. I think there's like a little kind of scratch in the mark there where you could kind of be like, hey, like, you know, we're paying for this phone or we're paying for this device. We're also paying for you to be available. I don't know. Isn't that part of being salary? I mean, kind of part of being salary is, you know, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Now, the other thing I said to you is I can never imagine this happening in America.
No.
I just can't see it.
No. Well, I don't know, because we have an employee shortage, so maybe it becomes one of the things that. Although I don't think government, because of the benefit packages are too good, I don't think they'll ever need to do that. But again, I don't know if it's an issue. Like we can walk over to the courthouse and ask the people, does anyone ever call you on weekends? Do you ever have to work weekends that aren't scheduled? Does your boss make you stay? You know, just depends where there's an issue.
Yeah. I think I'm pro right to disconnect. I just don't know what that would look like or how that necessarily would work out. Joe, if you were given an on-call stipend, would you agree to be tethered to your job for a certain amount of time outside of your normal 40 hours? So essentially, like, could you be?
Yeah, now that would be an option.
That makes sense.
If you're paid to be on call.
That makes sense. Jeff, you technically pay the salaries for those who work anywhere you spend your money. Target, Walmart, Wise. Are you saying they shouldn't ever disconnect either? I'm actually saying the opposite. I am saying that as a normal citizen within the free market that's paying taxes, I just, for a split second, I hesitate knowing that my taxes are helping pay for a government employee who gets this right to disconnect law that I myself don't get, or anybody else within the free market that's paying for those government. It's a circle that doesn't add up in my head right away. I would need someone smarter than me to explain how that is justified in my head.
Do you want me to explain it?
Go ahead.
Take the plea. You'll be home in 6 months. 6 months. It's a hockey season.
You are the worst. So no, I am pro the disconnect law. I'm just trying to figure out how that would work within a society where you're only doing it for government officials.
I'm just one more and I get a set of statements.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I can't.
That's all I'm doing. That's fine. You can do it one more time.
That's it.
Last thing that we wanted to talk about today. Penn State moves forward with James Franklin as their coach for the foreseeable future. And foreseeable, 10 years?
Is that how you see it? Is that how you spell it? I was right with the F-O-R-E.
I said that, but you were ignoring me. You were over there on your phone.
I said F-O-R-E, and you're like, F-O-R-S.
So you have this belief that Penn State's not a great job. However,
No.
However, James Franklin should just win the Big Ten every year.
Never said that.
And so I would love for you to explain to the people how James Franklin should win the Big Ten every year, but Penn State's not a great job.
First of all, when you start out and have to twist my words to start out, you can tell you're losing the argument already. I always said USC's as good of a job as Penn State, and Lincoln Riley will now agree with that. But Like, no, Penn State's a great job. And James Franklin's getting a lot of money. And I like James Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last 2 years, he's 500. He went 4-5 and 7-6.
Yep.
And he's making a lot of money to be, like, I bet Iowa's over 500 in the last 2 years. Michigan State, so he's been there 8 years. I know, as you just looked it up, he won the Big Ten title once. He's been in the Big Ten championship game twice. I know they have to go through Ohio State, and Ohio State's a juggernaut. And I know up until like last year, when things kind of went haywire with, whatever. It was last year's a messed up year, and this year they were on a roll until they fell off the roll. But sooner or later, like in the next, like 7-6 ain't going to cut it.
I totally agree. I don't disagree. A lot of what you're saying, I don't disagree with in the context of a 2-year bubble. Like in your 2-year window that you're discussing, you are correct. It was not good enough, especially merited the money in the contract that he just signed. I think when you expand out and you look at the 8 years and what he's done, I just think he's better than anybody else they would have been able to bring in. I truly believe that. And still do.
And I don't disagree with that.
Here, this is the other, and this is not your fault because you don't have it up in front of you. They won the Big Ten in 2016.
Okay.
Do you know how many times they've won the Big Ten championship?
Not many.
Do you know how many times they've won it?
They won it in 94.
Okay.
They won it
2005, and they won it in 2008. Now they were co-champions in 05 and 08. So they only have 2 outright Big Ten championships in their history.
When was the 16?
2016.
When did Franklin show up?
2014.
Okay, so he won a Big Ten championship with kids he didn't recruit.
He won a Big Ten championship with kids. I would say probably, to be fair, 40% of the roster wasn't his.
And the percent that's playing. You're not winning Big Ten
championships
with freshmen.
No. That I don't disagree with. But this is what I would say to you. Like, there's this idea that like, oh, he doesn't win anything. Like, oh, he hasn't done anything. He won as many outright Big Ten championships in his first 3 years at Penn State than the program did the entirety before him.
No, and I get that. But again, and I like Franklin. He won it with an inherited. That's like saying Barry Switzer has won as many Super Bowls as Andy Reid, which is factual. But Barry Switzer inherited a team that had just won 2 Super Bowls and was already loaded.
That's fine.
So,
I don't even necessarily disagree with your point if it was 100% about recruiting. I agree. I think recruiting
isn't that his thing?
I don't disagree with that, but I think part of what I'm saying is like you're acting as if you just bring in the best class, you're good. Like life will work itself out. There's still an aspect of this where like 2/3 of it, he still had to coach. Like, yes, 1/3 of it was he had this group and he got to work with it, but the other 2/3, like you got to pull off some upsets and you got to win and you got to keep them together. And the other part of it, like he implemented an entire system with dudes that weren't his dudes. So
I get it. And I know they've lost a lot of coordinators because that's what happens with good teams. And listen, you've set his record. Like it's not like they suck.
I believe I want to double check it. 65-28.
It was something
over the
like
8 years.
Like I'm not, and he's been on the cusp. Like they haven't been one of the top 4 because the top 4 have been Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and like Oklahoma or LSU, whatever. Yeah. But they've probably been 6 through 10 somewhere. For a while, they've been good. This year in the Big Ten, they were 13th in rushing. 13th. It has been a long time since Penn State's offensive line has been better than mediocre.
He has, without telling you the number, what to you is an acceptable winning percentage for a coach at Penn State? Like, what is the, like, overall at the end of their head coaching career, what should be their win percentage?
I mean, this is what I think of Penn State. If Penn State is this great job, which we would agree if it's not a top 10 job in the country, it's a top 15. Like it is an elite job. It's a better job than Iowa. They need to be better than Iowa.
Okay.
It's a better job than Michigan State. They need to be better than Michigan State.
Michigan State people would disagree, but continue.
The 3 best jobs in the Big Ten are Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State.
Okay.
So those should be, and Wisconsin's good too. They should be there every year.
So what is an ideal winning percentage for a career coach at Penn State? I'll give you this to help. Joe Paterno was just under 75% win percentage.
Well, I was going to say, they need to consistently be 8-4. A bad year for Penn State should be 8-4.
Okay.
A great year for Penn State should be 11-1.
Okay.
Going into a bowl game.
So what is a good win percentage?
Well, he should be around 8-4 to 9-3, somewhere between 67 and 70, somewhere around 70.
Okay. James Franklin's winning percentage right now is .699.
Okay.
He is at 70% win percentage.
And that's why I said I like him. It hasn't been a failure, but in the last 2 years, he's a 500 coach.
Yes.
And the further he gets it, he won early with guys he didn't recruit. The further he gets into it, the less successful they're getting. And that's the concern. They're trending the wrong way.
I think the winning is trending the wrong way. Everything else is trending the opposite way. Attendance is trending up. Recruiting is trending up. Everything else is trending up. I think in the last 2 years, you have this weird bubble of time with COVID and the transfer portal and things shifted. And I said to you, and I sound like I'm making excuses for them, they were 4-5 the COVID year. And I would argue their best and most important player never stepped on the field. Micah Parsons is about to be, he's a Pro Bowler. He should be a Pro Bowler this year. He never stepped on the field for him. Does he make them big? No. But does he make them 6-2
but
instead of 4-5? But he can't be
is he the only guy that opted out? I don't have the list in front of me.
For other schools,
yes, there must have been other guys.
No, but I think what we've seen this year from Micah Parsons is could you make the argument that he was by far the most important to a team on that side of the ball? Oh,
he certainly would have changed things. That 100%. Takes me to another topic. Because again, at the end of the day, I like Franklin. I think he's good for the program. I think he's been really unfairly criticized throughout because, as you just said, he's winning 70% of his games.
Yes.
He hasn't beat Ohio State enough, but he happened to show up at a bad time that Ohio State's been really, really good year in and year out.
It just cracks me up that Joe Paterno is held in such regard, and he almost had a winning percentage as good as James Franklin right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's what are we, why are people so, people should want to win. I don't know why people are so upset with James Franklin. It doesn't make sense.
Because the last 2 years, they're a 500 team.
Okay. And the 6 years before, he did something that Penn State had only done once ever before.
They weren't in the Big Ten until the 90s.
I understand
so
that.
That's not.
But that's still you had 21 years to do something that James Franklin literally matched it in 3 years.
And I get that. They just finished a season where they're not ranked again, and Pitt is. Mm-hmm. And at the Heisman ceremony in New York, Pitt had a guy there.
Sure. And
Penn State never had. No, not that Pitt ever has a guy there.
Sure.
It's probably the first guy that's been there since Dan Marino.
What's Penn State's record in the ACC this year?
In the ACC?
Yep.
0.
10-2.
Oh, what would it have been?
Yeah, what would it have been?
I don't know.
10-2?
It's a fair question.
Nothing against Pitt.
Well, I think Pitt almost beat Michigan State with a third-string quarterback.
Correct.
So
sure. I'm just saying. All respect.
No, and I get it.
All respect.
The Big Ten is a way better conference.
Way better.
But at the end of it, but Clemson is still there, and Clemson went 11-2 or whatever it was, and Pitt's the ACC champion. Mm-hmm. So, we'll wait until Penn State hangs another Big Ten championship because Pitt just won one.
That's fine. But what Pitt's doing is so different than what Penn State's doing.
By being ranked?
No, this is what I'm saying. When you look at, like I said to you, I went into a Penn State game for the first time in almost a decade this year. Mm-hmm. And it was a different experience. It wasn't even the same vibe. The aura and how people feel in that stadium right now is so different.
When did you go?
The end of the Paterno. I went to the Indiana game, I believe.
Were they ranked number 3?
They weren't quite ranked number 3, but it was early enough that they hadn't lost yet.
Okay, well that's why. If you would have gone at the end when they were 7-5, the vibe would have been different.
But you do this all the time because you said that no one was going to go to that Penn State game at the end of the year, and their attendance was still over 100,000. You remember that?
Yes,
You
yes.
came out and you were like, no one's going.
Yes.
It was so, because I'm telling you, it's a different vibe. And that's the part of it that people, if you're just a laid back Penn State fan and you check the score at night and you're just following the standings, sure. But if you're actually like, if you're looking at the recruiting boards and you're looking at attendance and you're looking at what the program and the vibe feels like, I mean, that's 3/4 of it that Franklin has completely trended upward and is still trending upward. I think right now they have the number 4 recruiting class in the country again. So it's,
and I'm with you. And
Yeah.
here's the thing: if they have the number 4 recruiting class in the country, they can't finish 13th in rushing again in the Big Ten.
I completely agree.
Considering Rutgers is in the Big Ten.
I completely agree with that.
Okay.
So in your 2-year window, you're right. Get rid of them. It's not working.
No. I'm not
But
saying get rid of them.
but in the 8-year window, it's insane that people are like, this isn't working.
I agree with that. But in the next 8 years, like you can't come off mediocre. Like the honeymoon. After a while, you look back. If 2 years from now he's 500 over a 4-year span,
Oh, sure.
then there's
Totally agree.
Okay.
Totally agree. Because again, the window expands and now it's real. It's
Right.
concrete. I'm not going to look at this 2-year window where you look at like COVID, transfer portal, NIL, everything flipped on its head. And I'm going to judge them off of this 2-year window that no one really knows. I think there are coaches right now that still don't really comprehend where they were 2 years ago.
No.
2 years ago, a college athlete couldn't be paid. There was no such thing as the transfer portal. COVID didn't exist. And all of a sudden, within 2 years, it's all here.
I get all that.
Okay.
But you know who the last 2 years didn't affect? Alabama,
it's
Ohio State,
but it's not Alabama,
Oklahoma.
and it's not Oklahoma, and it's not Ohio State. You and I agree with that. So if you're going to judge them off of that level, nobody should have the Penn State job. You should just circulate it every year.
No, but it's hard to claim we're one of the best jobs in the country, but 7-6 is good enough. And I know you're not saying 7-6 is good enough, but like if it's an elite job and it's an elite program, then you can't say, well, we're not as good as them. You have to be better than somebody. You have to be better than Pitt.
But I think most years they are.
Most years they are.
In 8 years, they've been better than Pitt 6, 5. Like it's not like they're not better than Pitt most years.
No, and I get that too.
Okay.
One of the ironies is the one year the last time they lost
To Pitt.
was
The year
we kept
they
them out of the
probably could have
national
won it.
championship.
Yes.
And that's, but you know, it's just another thing you look back and speaking of Pennsylvania schools and speaking of Pitt, how does Pitt capitalize on this Dorsey kid who's going to go to the NFL? And can they bring in other top flight quarterbacks and say, look what happened with this kid? And that's why it's even more shocking that after Barkley and after Miles, that Penn State doesn't have a running back, because you would have thought that they're like, if you're a great running back, you want to come to Happy Valley.
Yes.
And they didn't have any.
Now Noah Cain did get injured. You know that, right?
Yes.
Like he had like a severe leg injury and he has never really, and who knows, maybe Noah Cain wouldn't have been like an all-conference running back.
Is he the one with the heart condition?
No, I think he had a leg injury.
There was a kid, was Cain this year? There was another kid who had a heart condition who couldn't play.
Okay.
And I can't remember his name.
See, I'm not sure.
But yeah, I get it.
But when Noah Cain came out, like he was supposed to be like and listen, you never know with this stuff. Like Terrell Pryor from Jeanette, he was a PA. Remember Terrell Pryor? He was supposed to be, and then it just never, he was good, but it never really, so you never know with this stuff. However, I still like, it's not like after Barkley and Sanders, they didn't get the next guy. Like they got a top 10 running back in the country, and it
that is fair. That is
just
fair.
didn't. So I don't know.
Did you see Fleming? Did you see he hurt his shoulder again in the game?
I did not.
Did you watch any of it?
No.
It was like he caught a pass, he got tackled to the sideline. Okay. Like he got up and ran off.
Okay.
But you could tell that because he'd had a shoulder problem before. I thought he'd had surgery, or maybe he was waiting. I don't know.
Okay.
But it was
you just never know with this.
It just sucked.
I mean, not to downplay Fleming, because he's a nice. If you've ever met him before, he's a very nice kid. But like he is, if you go on to I think it's 247 Sports, they have like the all-time recruiting rankings, and he's like top 20, like top 10 all time for college football recruiting.
I still think he is such a specimen.
Yeah,
he's not a little. He's not like a Devontae
and his
Smith.
career's not over.
Solid.
Yes, and his career's not over. Like I'm not saying it couldn't still come to fruition.
I think it's coming.
But the point that I am making is you just don't.
Oh no, I get it.
Because to everyone else in the country, he was the surest thing in the world. and you just don't know with this stuff. You don't. So.
I get it. But I think, I assume it's at Ohio State, but even if it's not, if he can be healthy, because I heard he had a shoulder issue, and then I think he had another shoulder issue, but
yeah,
you would think they'd be able to fix that well enough. But I still can't imagine. He is so fast,
right? And
he's so athletic, and he's big and strong.
I think because of the COVID year and the injury, I think he's only going to be a junior next year.
He's got time left.
So I think, it's still possible. It's still there for him. Thank you guys for watching the Midday Show with Mark and Jeff. Thank you to Weiss Markets for being our title sponsor. And be sure to go to NorthcentralPa.com for all your local news. Anything before we jump off?
Go to YouTube.
Okay.
Download some Wasp.
Okay.
And bang your head.
How do you, is it up and down? Is it, how do you...
Do you know, this is a true story.
What do you do?
I have heard interviews with guys, because there are some guys with the hair, that's all they did, and they would have severe neck issues.
I believe it.
Because you just can't do that. You can do it for a song, you get it.
Right.
But they would do it whole shows.
Okay.
And I'm not guessing all of them. I'm sure some of them don't remember much of the shows, were a little whacked out of their mind while it was going on.
Sure.
And then after years and years of this, they're having their neck fused because they have
crazy.
With
the guitar, I feel like the guitar strap wouldn't help either.
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so either.
Some of those guys. But if your hair is that long and you're in a band, man, you got to do it.
You got to do it. That's part of the gig. I'm Jeff Everett.
I just cracked my neck doing that.
Thanks for watching.
God, getting old sucks.